Thank you, Frank. Tēnā koutou te whānau o Auckland Unitarians. Tēnā koutou ngā manuhiri. No mai haere mai ki tēnei whare karakia o te atua. Ko John DiLeo toko ingoa. No reira, tēnā koutou, tēnā tātou katoa. Good morning. Welcome everyone from near and far to this physical space made sacred by Auckland Unitarians since 1901, as well as to our virtual sanctuary. Welcome also to those watching the recording of this service at a later time. My name's John DiLeo, and I'll be leading our service today. The welcome words I've selected this morning are by Sherry Woodbury. The words are written for two voices, and I've asked Viv Allen to come forward and assist me in reading out the second part. Again, we reground ourselves here in our highest values.
Love is the center and foundation of this faith.
Love is the power that holds us together as a community.
As we enter into worship, then, let us open our hearts to the healing power of liberating love.
Because love is not only something we receive, but something we practice in community.
Let fall away all that might distract us from the wholehearted practice of love.
Let us be accountable to one another for doing the work of living our shared values through the spiritual discipline of love.
As we continue to listen and learn, to act and grow.
May each unfold in wholeness,
both deeply loving and truly loved.
Thank you, Viv. My opening words are by John M. Higgins. Welcome to this place. This is a home where no revealed truths are promoted and no scripture or human being accepted as infallible. This is a place for searching for truth. But we are believers. We believe in intellectual freedom. We believe in justice. We believe in compassion and concern for each other and the whole world. We believe in commitment to those ideals which make us caring and active in the struggles for human dignity. We are Unitarian Universalists. Now, minor failure in pre-planning. Ted, can I ask you to come forward and light the chalice? The words for our chalice lighting today are by Tracy Bleakney. It worked before, I swear. Hold it straight up first. This chalice burns with twin flames. The first flame burns for those who seek and defend the right to a free and responsible search for truth and meaning, so that each person may live according to conscience in a democratically elected society. The second flame burns for the defenders of freedom, working against those who would impose their own religious beliefs on others through intimidation or legislation. May we tend this fire always, ever vigilant and courageous in the struggle for freedom and justice for all. Please now join me in affirming the covenant of our congregation. Love is the doctrine of this church. The quest for truth is the sacrament, and service is its prayer. To dwell together in peace, to seek knowledge in freedom, to serve humankind in fellowship, to the end that all souls shall grow in harmony. Thus do we covenant with each other and with our God. This morning, for my presentation portion of the service, I'm going to do a couple of readings, which are excerpts from two sermons that Clay Nelson gave here in this church. After those two, we'll do our Koha hymn, and then I have a few remarks. And I'm hoping I've timed this all right. Oh, I should also mention, this past Thursday was U.S. Independence Day. Which got me thinking about freedom. So you've already heard the word free and freedom quite a few times in the words I've selected. To commemorate the event, of course, I am in my red shirt, white skin, and blue pants. And that's about how much I'm celebrating the 4th of July these days. So the first selection is from Clay's sermon, What Does Freedom Mean to You?, which he gave in November of 2021. The thing about freedom is that it is, after all, only a symbol. We read about freedom, dream about freedom, celebrate the idea of freedom, advocate and hope for freedom. But do ideas like freedom, democracy, public service, and public accountability still have the force that they had in times when they inspired a costly struggle against autocracy? Why might the ideas have lost that force, and how might they regain it? Freedom is an ideal, but is often limited to individual freedom of choice, with no entailment to the good of the society or a social bond. This is due to two totally different understandings of freedom. Those who are liberal-leaning tend to think of freedom as an emancipatory ideal. Throughout history, the desire to be free inspired countless marginalized groups to challenge the rule of political and economic elites. Liberty was the watchword of the Atlantic revolutionaries who, at the end of the 18th century, toppled autocratic kings, arrogant elites, and slaveholders, thus putting an end to the old regime. In the 19th and 20th centuries, Black civil rights activists and feminists fought for the expansion of democracy in the name of freedom, while populists and progressives struggled to put an end to the economic domination of workers. While these groups had different objectives and ambitions, sometimes putting them at odds with one another, they all agreed that their main goal, freedom, required enhancing the people's voice in government. When the late Representative John Lewis called on Americans to let freedom ring, he was drawing on this tradition. But there is another side to the story of freedom as well. Over the past 250 years, the cry for liberty has also been used by conservatives to defend elite interests. In their view, true freedom is not about collective control over government. It consists in the private enjoyment of one's life and goods. From this perspective, preserving freedom has little to do with making government accountable to the people. Democratically elected majorities, conservatives point out, pose just as much or even more of a threat to personal security and individual rights, especially the right to property, as rapacious kings or greedy elites. This means that freedom can best be preserved by institutions that curb the power of those majorities, or simply by shrinking the sphere of government as much as possible, preserving the status quo. How we sort out which meaning we pursue has to do with what is our truth. Statesman and philosopher Francis Bacon is probably most famous for his collection of essays, one of which is called Of Truth. The opening of the essay has always been very quotable. "What is truth?" said jesting Pilate, and would not stay for an answer. How wise jesting Pilate was, for even then the question of the nature of truth was a thorny one. And Bacon was under no illusions about the limitations of human nature. He thought that most people had a natural, though corrupt, love of the lie itself, and that a mixture of a lie doth ever add pleasure. It seems that Bacon was right then, and right now. But the attitude towards truth has changed. Now we accept the idea that there are different sorts of truth. The phrases historical truth, narrative truth, and emotional truth come trippingly off the lips. Then there are the complex notions of fantasy and fiction. We have long subscribed to the notion of novelists making up various lies or fantasies in order to tell underlying truths about human nature. But we also have to accept, I think, that a gentleman's word is no longer his bond. The pious used to intone the biblical warning regularly, "Be sure your sin will find you out." I've always assumed this meant that your secret wrongdoing would not remain secret forever. My more lighthearted mother used to refer to what she called the 11th commandment, "Thou shalt not be found out." During a recent interview on television, a certain leader made an effort not to be found out when asked what his favorite lie was. "I never lie," came the facile reply. "That's my favorite one too," riposted the interviewer, quick as a flash. So, being truthful with yourself, what does freedom mean to you? Before answering, do you agree with Bacon's idea that the candle lights of lies are more attractive than the naked daylight of truth? Or do you agree with his final thought that the knowledge and belief in truth is the sovereign good of human nature? If so, it will set you free. The second piece is from Clay's sermon, Freedom from Religion, given in March 2015. The first Anglican bishop of New Zealand, George Selwyn, was opposed to New Zealand having an established church and rejected efforts by Parliament to make the Anglican Church a state-supported institution. I suspect Selwyn's views were shaped more by the flaws, failures, and corruption of the established church in his homeland than by the writings of American revolutionaries such as Thomas Paine, James Madison, Thomas Jefferson, and John Adams, who midwifed the idea of separating church and state. But his resistance to Parliament's efforts recognized that it was unhealthy for the state and religion to be hand in glove. Perhaps he was aware of Thomas Paine's observation. Persecution is not an original feature in any religion, but it is always the strongly marked feature of all religions established by law. From my American perspective, I have known that author Robert Heinlein had it right when he wrote, "Almost any sect, cult, or religion will legislate its creed into law if it acquires the political power to do so." James Madison lamented, "There remains in some parts of the country a strong bias towards the old error, that without some sort of alliance or coalition between government and religion, neither can be duly supported. Such indeed is the tendency to such a coalition, and such its corrupting influence on both parties, that the danger cannot be too carefully guarded against." Madison was prescient about what would happen in the US. The religious right never accepted Jefferson's belief that a wall of separation between church and state was intended by the Constitution. They've never stopped trying to breach it. In 2001, George W. Bush became the first openly born-again president who believed, quote, "God wants me to be president." As president, he prayed daily that he be as good a messenger of his will as possible. He called his agenda compassionate conservatism, which launched faith-based initiatives that provided government funds to churches offering social services to the needy, opposed stem cell research, sex education beyond calling for abstinence, abortion, and same-sex marriage. He believed intelligent design should be taught alongside evolution and strongly supported charter schools that often had strong evangelical focus. His evangelical idealism came to the forefront after 9/11. He was adamant that, quote, "evil must be resisted, defeated, and he and his country have been called by God to do it, to be freedom's champion." As far as I was concerned, his war on terror was no different from Osama bin Laden's call for a jihad, and it was the last straw. It was time to leave what was becoming a theocracy. This is the future I fear for New Zealand. The Church's Education Commission, or CEC, having succeeded in getting the Nelson system, its system of Bible in schools injected under the guise of values education, into law, has done its best to hide its agenda by giving cute names to its curricula, like Cool Bananas. Schools fail to communicate to parents that their children are even in the program, and if they don't like it, they must go through various hoops to get their children out of it. They and the schools have rarely provided an attractive alternative for children who are opted out. They now brag on their website that they have instituted a school chaplaincy program. Chaplains are there to counsel children at times other than the Bible in school class. There have been numerous complaints that they have been actively proselytizing our most vulnerable children on the playground and at lunch. As abhorrent as I find these abuses by the CEC and the schools in league with them, I believe there is a bigger threat. The CEC agenda has given the word secular a negative connotation, a connotation that implies that being secular has nothing to do with religion, when in truth it has everything to do with protecting freedom of religion. At a time when adherents to various religions are shedding blood around the globe in the name of their God, often in horrific ways, it is incumbent on us to understand the place of religion in society if we are to develop tolerance and understanding in our increasingly multicultural country. But that is not happening in New Zealand schools. The Thursday just passed was U.S. Independence Day, the annual celebration of that country's declaration and eventual winning of independence from English colonial rule. That occasion got me thinking about freedom in the patriotic land of the free and home of the brave sense. Eventually, though, it brought me to a few questions. What freedoms do I really have? Which ones matter most to me? What would I be willing to do to preserve them? During previous services I've led, I spoke from this pulpit about the freedom from fear I realized I'd gained by fleeing the violence and madness of my former homeland, the United States. I've also spoken about the freedom of movement and association I've enjoyed my entire life by virtue of my privileged circumstances. You might have noticed I'm a white, English-speaking, cis, straight man of Christian heritage with multiple graduate degrees, expertise in a niche technical field, and a U.S. passport. And how I eventually realized just how much those privileges have helped me throughout my life. So those are things I've talked about before. As you might have guessed from my reading selections, though, my thinking this time settled around freedom of thought, as embodied by our third and fourth principles: acceptance of one another and encouragement to spiritual growth in our congregation, and a free and responsible search for truth and meaning. A particular embodiment of this freedom is freedom of religion, or arguably more importantly, freedom from religion. The right not to profess any religion or belief at all, or to have someone else's beliefs imposed upon us culturally or legally. As residents of a free country, we might consider this right to be self-evident and might even assume it's universally recognized. I know I once did. In many parts of the world, reality is actually quite far from that. In fact, as we heard in the second reading, things aren't exactly perfect here. In December, Humanists International published their updated Freedom of Thought report. As they tell us on their website, the Freedom of Thought report assesses every country in the world on the basis of human rights and the legal status with regard to humanists, atheists, and the non-religious. We believe it is important to document discriminatory national laws and state authorities which violate freedom of religion or belief and freedom of expression, as well as affecting the overtly non-religious, such as atheists and humanists. Such systemic discrimination also often affects religious people, in particular minorities and nonconformists, and the unaffiliated, those who hold no particular worldview or religion. Systemic legal discrimination can include such things as established state churches, religious instruction provided without secular ethical alternative classes in schools, through to severe punishments such as prison for crimes of insulting religion or death merely for expressing your atheism. In their press release announcing the publication of the December report, Humanists International highlighted several key findings. The report finds that humanists are discriminated against in 186 countries across the globe through a combination of the following. Government figures or state agencies openly marginalize, harass, or incite hatred or violence against the non-religious in 11 countries. It is illegal or unrecognized to identify as an atheist or as non-religious in 15 countries. The barring of the non-religious from holding at least some offices exists in 23 countries. The derivation of state legislation in whole or in part from religious law exists in 34 countries. Blasphemy remains a punishable offense in at least 87 countries across the globe. The use of religious courts on family or moral matters takes place in 48 countries. There is discriminatory funding of religion in 85 countries. It is difficult or illegal to run an overtly humanist organization in 32 countries. And the provision of mandatory religious instruction in state-funded schools takes place without a secular or humanist alternative in 33 countries. Wow. In their entry for New Zealand, the organization acknowledges the country's attitude toward religious freedom is generally good, but points out a few problem areas, some of which you heard in the previous reading. Preferential treatment is given to a religion or to religion in general. State funding of religious institutions or salaries or discriminatory tax exemptions. Official symbolic deference to religion. There is state funding of at least some religious schools, and state-funded schools offer religious or ideological instruction with no secular or humanist alternative, though it is technically optional. One item they note, of which I hadn't been aware. Until 2019, a blasphemy law had been in place in New Zealand, under a section on crimes against morality and decency, sexual crimes, and crimes against public welfare within the Crimes Act 1961. In theory, blasphemy offenses were punishable with a prison term. The section criminalizing blasphemy was repealed by the Crimes Amendment Act 2019. I guess we should be proud of our homeland's eventual progress on that front. One of the reasons I started attending a UU fellowship in the first place is the fact that we explicitly do not require members to profess any particular creed, or in fact to profess any creed at all. We are free to believe or not believe whatever we like, with the concurrent expectation that we respect others in their beliefs or non-beliefs. We also see that religious freedoms, wow, I missed a segue there. Next thought. We also see that religious freedoms, especially the freedom from having others' religious beliefs imposed on us through legislation, continues to be under attack. The right-wing activist takeover of the Supreme Court and many lower federal courts in the US is a particularly egregious example. Many protections from religiously motivated government interference, which we had believed were enshrined as the law of the land in the US, have been successfully stripped away, with little hope we'll see them restored for at least another generation. And the onslaught continues. Complicating the situation is the fact we lack a freedom I really wish we had. Freedom from alternative facts. We find ourselves living under a constant barrage of misinformation and disinformation, manufactured and spewed by every special interest group under the sun, providing versions of reality that precisely align with their respective agendas and conveniently exclude the possibility that their opponents have valid concerns and needs or are worthy of respect or consideration. It's difficult enough to reach an accord among parties seeking conflicting outcomes when they actually share a common reality. The problem is magnified many times over when the various parties operate from mutually contradictory collections of truth. As a creed-free community of faith, I believe it falls particularly on UUs around the world to speak up for freedom of thought and freedom from religion. As New Zealand's only active UU congregation, we have an important role to play in those debates here. Make no mistake, it won't be easy, but it couldn't be more important. Now, please join with me as we say the words for Extinguishing the Chalice. We extinguish this flame, but not the light of truth, the warmth of community, or the fire of commitment. These we carry in our hearts until we are together again. Thank you, Ted. The closing words I've selected today are by Rhys Williams. Remembering our spiritual, courageous ancestors who forsook oppression with security to gain freedom with opportunity, may we go forth to master ourselves by accepting duty with responsibility, by showing balance in our judgments, and by having breadth of vision in our deliberations. May we be exemplars of that spirit, moving forward with conviction and commitment, with unity and without uniformity, with brotherhood and sisterhood to serve the truth that sets us free. Amen. All right, for approximately 10 minutes, we'll get together in small groups to discuss our thoughts on these questions. The questions are, what freedoms do you cherish most highly? And are there freedoms you wish you had, but feel you don't?